Welcome to Litcast, the podcast covering literature notes and revision for GCSE. These podcasts are designed to be used as an additional revision tool. There's nothing new or groundbreaking here, just revision notes in an on-the-go friendly format. Using these alone won't guarantee you an A star, but they can help you build your confidence to apply this knowledge to your exam questions and your classwork. With that being said, let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome back. In this episode we're going to be looking at the theme of guilt and forgiveness. This is another major theme in the text and of course involves a lot of the major characters as well and appears in many different ways. So of course the most obvious link to guilt would be Francis. Francis is consumed by guilt throughout the novel. He feels guilt at the thought that he intends to commit murder, and his failure to save Nicole from Larry is an even greater source of guilt for him. And of course guilt therefore is his motivation for a lot of what he does, or everything that he does really, after the assault. Francis's sense of guilt is compounded by the guilt he feels at being acclaimed as a hero, because he only knows he committed his act of bravery in the hope that he would be killed. So everything that he is applauded for, he feels is unjustified, which only adds to his sense of guilt. But unlike Francis, Larry does not appear to be troubled by a guilty conscience. In chapter 14, he explains that in his view, everyone sins, and one sin should not be allowed to wipe away all the good things a person has done. He regards his desire for young girls as merely a flaw in his nature, so while he accepts its evil, he doesn't accept that he is evil or a bad person as a result. He regrets only that Francis and Nicole no longer see him as the hero that they once did. Cormier's portrayal of Larry is very complex, and we could argue that his depression at the end of the novel comes more from self-pity than from guilt. And again, that's something that you can argue and make your points about. So as noted, there are many references to Heroes to guilt and forgiveness, and many of these are linked to the Catholic concepts of sin and redemption, because religion is also a theme in the story. The key event in question is, of course, Larry's assault on Nicole and Francis and failing to intervene. After the incident, when Francis realises that Nicole blames him for not saving her, he's consumed with that sense of guilt, like we've said. But it's so extreme it makes him suicidal, even though this is itself considered one of the gravest sins. It's this guilt that leads him to enlist, throw himself on a grenade. But despite his disfigurement and the lives he saves, Francis's sense of guilt is not lessened. In actual fact, it's intensified by others' perception of him as a hero. So that real contrast there between what other people think of Francis and what Francis thinks of himself, and actually the more people applaud Francis, the worse he feels about himself. It's a really interesting dynamic. Larry, as we said, appears to feel little guilt for what he did to Nicole, but he is pretty shocked at Francis's hatred for him, and that seems to affect him more than the assault itself, or the impact of the assault. He asks Francis, "Does that one sin of mine wipe away all the good things?" A very key quote for Larry, really. Larry does try to relieve Francis's sense of guilt, though. He tells him he's not to blame for what happened at the rec centre, and in the end he chooses to take his own life to prevent Francis from committing the sin or the crime of murder. He says, "Leave everything here, the war, what happened at the rec centre, leave it all behind with me." So, imperatives there. Notice that he's taking control, he's commanding the situation again, but he's doing that this time to spare Francis the guilt, arguably. Nicole too seems to feel guilt for having blamed Francis, apologising to him in chapter 16 and immediately offering him forgiveness, although it's clear she can't actually forget what's happened, of course. Francis does not respond directly, but he does appear to then be able to move forward, having seen both Larry and Nicole for the last time and heard that they do not blame him. It's up to the reader to decide whether Francis has found the redemption and forgiveness he was searching for. And that redemption and forgiveness, we therefore decide, determines what he does after the story ends. The theme of forgiveness is actually introduced in chapter 1, where readers see Francis praying for a man who's done him harm. The religious element of forgiveness is emphasised here and again in chapter 12, where Francis hides in the confessional at St Jude's Church. It's as though he wants immediate forgiveness for his perceived sin of abandoning Nicole when she needed him most. And locations are, again, significant in this story. It's a short story, but everything is very consciously constructed and created to really uphold some of these major themes. Remember St Jude as well, the patron saint of lost causes, which adds to the sense of despair in the story, but also seeks to exemplify some of those key moments in relation to themes. So St Jude's Church, the patron saint of lost causes, where Francis hides in a confessional after everything that's happened. So that whole idea, that whole notion of Francis seeking forgiveness in a place which is blessed by a saint of lost causes adds to that sense of despair. Nicole is the character in the novel who personifies goodness. Part of that could be down to the biased narration, but ultimately she does personify goodness. And her first words to Francis are ones of forgiveness when they meet up again, apologising to him for the words she said. It's not clear whether her words relieve Francis from his burden of guilt or not, like we said. And she's gracious about it, but it's clear that Nicole can't forget what happened. And I think it's too much, really, to expect that Nicole should forget what happened to her, because it's so pivotal and so traumatic as well, in the same way that none of the soldiers are expected to just forget what happened to them. It's a trauma that's very personal to them, and they deal with it in very different ways, all of them. But it's not about forgetting, it's about learning to live with and accepting, and that's where they all differ in their approach. So that's the episode on guilt and forgiveness. Again, just a quick introduction, some places where you might want to look for some ideas in terms of writing about this theme, and maybe looking at the contrasts again between Francis and Larry. It's impossible really to write about anything in this story without writing about the three main characters, so knowing them and really knowing how they link to the themes is really useful. I think in a previous episode I mentioned that the assault takes place in chapter 13, which of course it doesn't. It takes place in chapter 11, so I apologise for that. I think I was thinking about something else entirely. So yeah, chapter 11 is where the assault takes place. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. Of course, we will be carrying on looking at some more themes in Heroes over the next few episodes. Remember that this isn't comprehensive. This alone won't get you an A star, and indeed nothing but practice and answering the question in front of you effectively and precisely is going to get you the grade that you want. So make sure that you're using these in conjunction with any of your class teachers' assignments and notes that they're giving you. The notes that I'm using are, again, resources that I would use with my class if I was teaching them face to face, but also paraphrasing some bits from the York notes, which your class teacher may have a copy of and let you view, or of course they are available to purchase as well. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to join you in the next episode. The music used in this podcast is by Ixon, and you can find him on SoundCloud. The tracks used are Eclipse and Explore.